The night I hired an escort for a charity gala, I thought the worst thing that could happen was embarrassment. The lights were already too bright, the ballroom too polished, and my chest too tight with the kind of loneliness that wears a tailored suit. Then, in the middle of the crowd's glittering laughter, she leaned closer than the music and shared a truth that stopped my breath cold, a quiet confession about her age that made me question everything I thought I understood about people, judgment, and grace. Before the story pulls you deeper, take a second and tap like, comment, share, and subscribe if you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us to see the human before the label. Your support keeps these stories alive. My name is Thomas Whitaker, and I live in Boston, Massachusetts, a city that prides itself on history while quietly demanding perfection. I was a mid-level executive at a biomedical firm, the kind of job that looked impressive from the outside but left me hollow by the time the workday ended. The invitation to the annual Children's Hope Foundation Gala arrived with my name printed in confident ink, plus a subtle note suggesting guests attend with a companion. I had lost my wife, Margaret, 3 years earlier to a sudden illness, and while time had taught me how to function, it had not taught me how to feel normal in rooms full of couples. I told myself the escort was just a practical solution, a way to blend in, to stop the sympathetic looks and the whispered questions. I found a reputable agency that emphasized professionalism, boundaries, and discretion. No scandal, no shame, just a presence. Her profile said her name was Grace Sullivan. She was described as articulate, composed, and 22 years old, clearly an adult, clearly within legal lines, and yet young enough to make me uneasy about how the world might judge us standing side by side. When she arrived at my apartment to prepare for the evening, the cinematic contrast struck me immediately. She wore a deep navy dress that shimmered like calm water under moonlight, and she carried herself with a careful confidence that suggested life had asked her to grow up faster than planned. There was no flirtation, no performance, just a polite warmth, like someone who knew how to read a room and survive it. The gala itself unfolded in a grand hotel ballroom overlooking the Charles River. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished floors, and the air buzzed with donors, executives, and politicians congratulating one another for generosity that often doubled as self-promotion. I felt the familiar tightening in my shoulders as we entered, but Grace moved beside me with ease, her presence grounding in a way I had not expected. She listened when people spoke, laughed at the right moments, and somehow made me feel less like an accessory and more like a person again. As the evening progressed, I noticed how often eyes followed her, not with lust, but with curiosity and judgment mixed together. I worried about what they saw when they looked at us. A widower trying to replace a ghost. A younger woman chasing security, the assumptions pressed on me heavier than the tuxedo. It was during one of those moments, while the orchestra softened and conversations blurred into background noise, that she leaned close enough for me to sense the tremor in her breath and shared her concern about her age, asking without words if it would be a problem for me or for how I saw her. The question hit harder than any accusation. It was not about legality or appearances. It was about worth. I realized in that instant how often people like her were reduced to numbers, labels, and shortcuts that ignored their stories. She was not asking permission to exist. She was asking if she would be dismissed. I struggled internally, because I had hired her to avoid judgment, yet here I was confronting my own. My mind raced through memories of Margaret, of the values she lived by, of the way she believed everyone carried unseen battles. I thought about how Grace had navigated the night with dignity, how she spoke about college classes she was taking part-time, how she sent half her earnings back to her mother in Ohio, a woman named Ruth Sullivan who worked double shifts at a nursing home. The rest of the evening changed after that moment. I stopped worrying about the room and started paying attention to the human being beside me. I introduced her with pride, not as a prop, but as a companion whose presence mattered. When donors asked questions, I answered honestly about my life, my loss, and why I supported the foundation. I noticed Grace relax, her shoulders lowering, her smile becoming less guarded. At one point, a senior board member named Harold Bennett made a remark that dripped with condescension, the kind that pretends to be humor. I felt anger rise, but before I could react, Grace responded with grace in the truest sense, steering the conversation toward the charity's mission and the children it served. The man faltered, exposed by his own smallness, and I felt something shift inside me. Respect replaced fear. By the time dessert was served, the evening had raised more money than expected. Applause filled the room, and for the first time since Margaret's passing, I felt connected to something larger than my grief. I realized that healing does not always come from looking backward or forward, but from standing fully present with another person and choosing compassion. When the gala ended and the crowd thinned, the city lights reflected on the river like scattered prayers. We walked out together, no longer performing roles, just two people sharing the quiet after a storm. I understood then that while our paths might not intertwine beyond the night, the impact of seeing each other fully would linger. I drove Grace home, the silence comfortable, thoughtful. I thought about how easily society draws lines, how quickly it decides who deserves respect. That night challenged me to redraw those lines within myself. I paid her, thanked her, and wished her well, knowing that the real transaction had nothing to do with money. It was about dignity freely given and received. In the weeks that followed, I made changes. I volunteered more with the foundation, mentoring young adults aging out of foster care. I spoke openly about loss and loneliness, about how asking for help is not weakness. I even reconnected with my faith community, drawn back by the belief that love looks like action, not judgment. Grace sent me a handwritten note weeks later, simple and sincere, thanking me for seeing her. I kept it in my desk drawer, a reminder that every encounter carries the potential to change us if we let it. If this story has been touching your heart so far, please pause near the end and engage with the video. Like it, share it, and let others feel this message too. And before we reach the final moments, here is a special request. Please comment below with the word grace if you believe that kindness can change lives in quiet, powerful ways. The night I hired an escort taught me that redemption does not always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes dressed in navy blue, standing under chandeliers, asking a simple question about age and acceptance. It comes when we choose to look past assumptions and see the soul standing in front of us. If this story moved you, if it reminded you to choose compassion over comfort, please engage with this video from your heart. Your support helps keep stories like this alive, and together, we can keep choosing grace.